Hi folks, it's Shakespeare's birthday today, so I thought I'd do a Shakespeare video. So happy Shakespeare's birthday. And so we're going to talk through the principal tips for becoming a Shakespeare actor, a better Shakespeare actor as quickly as possible. So another list video, we'll get through to the tactics and actions one very soon, but I'd forgotten that today was that day, so I thought we'd do a Shakespeare list. So the 5 quickest ways to be a better Shakespearean actor as opposed to a stage actor in general. I've got 5 points that I want to talk through that specifically when it comes to Shakespeare, quite often when it comes to classical texts in general, certainly Elizabethan Jacobean texts, these will be pointers to any kind of thing there. And in some cases all kind of archaic texts as well. So the number 1 important element, the number 1 tip for performing Shakespeare better is to stop lying to yourself about whether you understand certain lines or not. Obviously it is vital that you understand everything that you're saying. I've noticed that a lot of people will nod off that they do understand it, or maybe because they understand all the individual words, that means that they know what they're saying. But too often, all the time, right up to the top level, you will see people saying Shakespearean lines and they don't really know what they're actually communicating. Now, I mean, the intentions behind the words, the priority of the words, the phrasing of the words, and really why the character would say that in that way. So do not lie to yourself and cheat yourself as to whether you actually understand what you're saying or not. Because quite often, people, whether it's a director or a tutor, they won't pull you up on it. Because quite often, some of the time, they'll be doing the same thing. Or other times it will just be something that, well, we can't stop every line, so we can't, stop you and challenge you on what you're saying all of the time. And sometimes it's just you're sure that it seems self-evident. You're kind of, I'm going to sneeze. Well, I do apologise. I'm still going to carry on. Never mind. So it's vital that you understand what you're saying. The second thing, and it comes directly with this as well, and it seems tough, but don't paraphrase. There are an awful lot of paraphrasing translations online. Don't use them. They're awful. You can't. Because if you do a paraphrased version of anything, it's not Shakespeare. Shakespeare, only 2-3 of his plays are actually original. So if you're approximating Shakespeare, which is what you're doing whether it's via exercises or in your head, you're doing, then you're not actually delivering Shakespeare. Because just the story isn't Shakespeare. It's the language specifically that makes Shakespeare what it is. Now, does that mean that you don't look up what an equivalent to an individual word is? No, of course, sometimes you have to do that in order to do the first point that I've said. Know what you're saying. But you have to translate that long before you look at your phrasing. You have to deliver everything that you're saying as though it is a thought coming to you in that moment. And in order to do that, you can't be thinking, well, I mean something else, or I mean this in 2020, and that was how you said it then. No, you have to own the specific words that you are saying, otherwise you aren't doing Shakespeare. Having a general, and the more general you get, the worse it gets. If you think about, well, in this speech, this is the general sentiment. That really is not anything then. You're not delivering Shakespeare at all. You might as well just come on and tell what the story is. Which is, again, not Shakespeare. Shakespeare is not the stories. Twelfth Night is a play called Gli Innamorati, that existed in many forms way before Shakespeare wrote it, and that's the story of Viola and Orsino and all of the characters that exist in Twelfth Night. The structure of that story pre-existed the structure of all of the stories. The structure of Hamlet pre-existed, the structure of Othello pre-existed, the story of King Lear pre-existed. It's not the stories that are why Shakespeare is Shakespeare. You know, Merry Wives of Windsor is just a completely standard farce. Actually, Merry Wives of Windsor, I think, is one of the original stories, so that's a bad example. But Comedy of Errors, As You Like It, any of them. It's not the stories that are his. Romeo and Juliet certainly was a play that existed in multiple forms. So, don't approximate and don't paraphrase either when you're doing the exercises or in your head, and certainly don't use those awful website translation things. Number 3. Don't forget that these are real people. I've kind of said already that your thoughts have to be coming across as coming to you in that moment. These are really people, really communicating. This applies to stage acting in general, that it can become quite oratory. Particularly when, I mean, I don't know who's watching this, so if you're not watching this in the UK, it might not be a direct alignment, but we have things here called LAMDA exams. And a lot of young students, when they're learning acting, do these exams, and they're marked on kind of voice, but they're not voice as an actor uses them. They're voice in a kind of debatey, oratory. I am doing this, and it's all about being really clear and having good diction, which are important, and projection especially. These are not important things, but they're things that are only a part of the journey because they don't allow for proper genuine communication, and proper genuine communication is as important as in Shakespeare as it is in Tennessee Williams, or important as in television. So you have to keep in mind that these are real people that you're inhabiting. No scrimping on the physical work, because it's a voice type deal. No, you do the same amount of physical work as you do for everything else. And you certainly listen, and you certainly respond, and you certainly speak in a way that is about communicating and listening to other people. In the same way that you can't paraphrase what you're saying, you can't paraphrase what you're listening either. You can't be thinking, oh, this is the general sentiment of what this person is saying to me. No, that is what this person is saying to you. And if you don't know what that means instantly, then you haven't done enough work before you got to rehearsals. Okay. Number 4 is do your verse work. There'll be people out there who say, oh, but you can do the verse work, but it's really all about the way that you do it and familiarity with it and comfort with it. And the people who do the verse work are kind of more scholarly. It's a lie. It's a lie. You can't do Shakespeare properly without doing the verse work unless you go through and scan those verse sections. Obviously, this only applies to the parts of Shakespeare that are verse, but all of the plays have some verse in, and all of the plays other than Merry Wives and a couple of others are majority verse, and most of them are vast majority verse. You can't scrimp on, and maybe we'll do another video on this in some time, on your I ams and what does this mean for a character, and if there are 11 syllables in a line, what am I looking for? You know, because that is a part of the analysis, that's a part of the mine that you go into, in the same way that you would go into the given circumstances of a play, because really the language is the given circumstance in Shakespeare. And if a character who's speaking in iambic pentameter then says 11 syllables in a line, that should be shouting out to you. And if it isn't shouting out to you and you don't use that as a character note, then you're missing a fundamental instruction that's basically as good as a stage direction. That's maybe the way to think of them. Think of them as stage directions, the verse structure. You know, if you think of a moment like in Coriolanus, where Coriolanus says 10 syllables of a line, and then somebody else says another 2 syllables in that same line, and then Coriolanus says the 13th syllable of the line. Or in King Lear, when King Lear says never, 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 never. Unless you can feel and resonate the impact of those moments because you know what that means from a verse point of view, then you are not adhering to the instructions that are being given to you by the writer, who happens to be the greatest writer in the English language who ever lived. Probably. He is. Arguably, he is. So do the verse work. You know your caesuras, know your trochees and spondees and iambs. Know what all of those things, know what alliteration is, know what antithesis is, and all of that kind of business. And the final thing is, don't forget that you're delivering the lines of somebody who is quite good, so you can let him do quite a lot of the work. How much naturalistic technique one uses in Shakespeare is open to quite a lot of debate, but as I've indicated already, I tend to adhere quite strongly to naturalistic technique when I'm not talking, and I don't put any in when I am talking. And I think that there is a huge trap if you try to put too much subtext when you are talking. So when I say let Shakespeare do the work, that means trust the lines and what you're saying and dedicate yourself completely to what it is that you are saying, rather than try to do some additional kind of auxiliary emotional or subtextual or objective-based work on the top of that. You are saying what you're saying and you're totally committed to what you're saying, its meaning, and the stakes of communicating that to the other person. Unless you've got a very, very strong reason for subtextual qualities. And usually, even if, let's say, you're lying, like Iago in Othello, you're lying convincingly, so you might as well just commit to the lines that you're saying, even though they may be lies. And physicalise those, and root everything from that text. Okay? Well, I hope that's useful. And I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye. I'm sorry for sneezing.